be put in the chat. Great. All right, do you want to get started, Michelle? Sweet. I will just share my screen. Oh, I lost you. Hold on, I'll share first. Share screen. Great, can everyone see what I've just put on the screen? Perfect. So as hopefully you are aware, we're going to begin the session today with a brief introduction to cooperatives. I'm sure many of you are aware of how the cooperative model works, but this will give us a great foundation with which to sort of continue the conversation in the latter half of the session. It should take about 20 minutes, and then we'll hop into diving into some more examples in the agriculture and food realm, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk with Elvie and ask some questions from Elvie, our co-op developer who is present. So to begin, what is a cooperative? By definition, a cooperative is a voluntary association of members who come together to serve a common need. We can imagine this little circle of dots here as our members, either individuals or organizations, coming together to achieve something together. Oh, sorry, it's jumping ahead. And in doing so, all members purchase a share in the organization, which then generates a shared pool of capital that they can use to address their common need. And by having all these shares that are purchasing this organization in shares, everything is owned in common by the membership. Members also get an equal vote in electing a board of directors, represented in the middle of the circle here by the purple dots. And the board is the people who then make the key decisions to ensure that the cooperative achieves its goals. Sometimes members will get votes to determine other things, but really they are voting primarily on the board of directors, who is then making the key decisions for the cooperative. If the cooperative has a surplus at the end of the year, the members then get to decide where the money goes. And this can look a couple different ways. Sometimes it looks like patronage returns, which is sort of the co-op equivalent of dividends. And these will be paid out based on how much people use the cooperative. So for example, if you have a grocery store cooperative, someone who shopped at the co-op once a week might get a greater patronage return than someone who just shopped at the cooperative once a month. The money surplus can also go into reinvestment into the cooperative. So like purchasing more resources, investing in infrastructure. Really, the point, though, is to make sure that the surplus is going towards supporting the membership of the cooperative. So if patronage returns is the best way the co-op can support the members, then they'll do that. If securing the cooperative as an entity so that it is sustainable going forward is the most important, then the surplus can go towards that as well. That was really quick, but now let's dive into what really makes the difference between a cooperative and, say, a traditional company or a nonprofit society, so that we really get a sense of how this structure makes a co-op different. So we'll start with the company, and we're just going to build sort of the company structure together. The top, we have the shareholders of the company who own it. And within the shareholders, there is a collection of directors who make decisions about the company and how it operates. Differently from a cooperative, here what we see is that the directors are not necessarily elected, they're chosen based on how much money they have themselves invested into the company. And so it's not as democratic as a cooperative because it's based on investment rather than just participation in general. Below the shareholders and directors, we have the actual sort of operations, the company structure. We have the president or CEO who hires management and staff, and they carry out the day-to-day, the operations of the company. And then sort of separate from that, we have the customers, and they are purchasing the goods or services from the company, and then in turn, returning revenue back into the company. And then this gets paid out in dividends, again, to the shareholders. And again, this is sort of based on how much people have invested in the company. And so what's important to notice here is again, what this return of dividends, what also happens is that money isn't necessarily staying in one place. It can be going anywhere around the world. The wealth is going to wherever the shareholders are, which aren't necessarily tied to a specific location. And so what's important to notice about that is that uh, is that the money is not tied to a specific community and is not necessarily generating wealth within a community. It's generating wealth elsewhere. Next, we have the society, and we'll start with the society also has some form of membership. What's interesting about a nonprofit society is that the membership may not necessarily be the ones who are accessing the services of the society, but they are ones who might pay some membership fee to then be able to be a part of this board of directors that is elected by the membership. And then within this organization, we also have the executive director who hires staff to carry out the operations of the organization. And the money that comes into a society is coming from external sources. So that might be government or private foundations. And then it goes out into some sort of service that is provided for a particular community. Importantly to note here, there is no profit because it is a nonprofit organization. And also it's not really owned by anyone in particular. It's its own separate entity. And that again, those services that are being provided by the society aren't necessarily for the members of the society, but for some sort of greater public good. And now we'll go back to that circle of members that we started with as the sort of foundational structure of the cooperative. So as we'll look at this now and see how the members really provide the foundation and container for all of the aspects of a cooperative structure. So the members themselves elect their board of directors, who then hires the executive director and management and then staff to carry out the operations of the cooperative. And then they produce some sort of good or service that then goes back into the membership. So we see it started with the members deciding on their board of directors, and then that service is being directly delivered to the membership. And then again, we see this in reporting. The staff report back to management, to the executive director, to the board of directors, and that reporting goes back out to the membership. And so some key things to really notice here as distinguishing factors from the society and the company is that the organization is very democratic. You know, we talked about at the very beginning, every member gets an equal vote, no matter how much money they have invested in the cooperative. And then this means that they own and are in control of their services. It also means that when the money sort of stays within the community, so when, you know, as we talked about, if there's a surplus, it either stays in the cooperative or it stays within the membership, and this really can support the wealth of the members or the sustainability of the cooperative itself. And that's the sum of that. So that's the distinguishing factors of a cooperative from these two other types of organizations. Important to note, which we'll get to in a little bit, but the reason we've used this terminology is that society and company is that a cooperative can be for profit or not for profit, but it's really this structural piece that makes the difference here. Some other distinguishing factors about cooperatives is they also have universally agreed upon cooperative values and principles, and they are the only type of business structure that has these internationally agreed upon values and principles, and we'll go into them really briefly now just to give a sense of what they are. So the cooperative values are self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equity, equality, and solidarity. And these then inform the 7 cooperative principles, which are really the guidelines foundation for how cooperatives are agreeing to operate in the world as organizations. And the first principle is voluntary and open membership. And this means that anyone should be able to join the cooperative if they are able to assume the responsibility of membership and able to benefit from the services that the cooperative provides. And this shouldn't be, and they shouldn't be discriminated against based on any, you know, factors about their identity or race, sexuality, class, all these things. It's also, I think, interesting to note that this principle includes voluntary. There have been some cases where cooperatives, people have been forced to join cooperatives by government to support the economic growth of an area. And so not only is membership open, but is also voluntary. People should have the right to choose to be a part of a cooperative. Number two is democratic member control. This comes back to that one member, one vote idea that members are collectively deciding on how their cooperative operates and runs. Number three is member economic participation, and that's the piece of members contributing to the capital of the cooperative as well as being in control of that capital. Number four is autonomy and independence. So they're, autonomous organizations making decisions about what they want to do with their wealth and resources. Number five is education, training, and information, which is why I'm here today, because cooperatives are invested in supporting the knowledge and understanding and education of their membership, especially to ensure that cooperatives can continue to operate. It's important that members, since they are the ones who are making key decisions, are informed about how they can be engaged and involved members of their cooperatives. Number six is cooperation among cooperatives, and this really is the idea that as cooperatives, it benefits us to work together as a movement rather than working in competition with one another. And number seven is concern for community. So this idea that cooperatives, not only do they serve their membership, but we're also contributing to some greater good and support for our community. I know this is really fast, but we can ask questions in a little bit. Though do interrupt me, Michelle, if anything comes up in the chat. So for those of you who are aware of cooperatives and the cooperative movement, you may have heard, or likely you have heard the story of the Rochdale Equitable Pioneer Society of Equitable Pioneers, which is often credited as the first instance of cooperation, of formal cooperation in history. And this is, while lots of great things came out of Rochdale, I want to give us all a little bit of a bigger picture of cooperative history around the world, and really start off by saying that while this moment happened in England with the Rochdale Society, cooperation is not a new phenomenon. It's something that humans have done as long as we have existed on this planet. It's a part of all living beings. As we see here, we have this image of the bees collaborating to get from one place to another. And so cooperation is really an innate trait that we have as beings, and I want to explore that through this brief history in the next slide. So evidence of some sort of societies of cooperative practice go back as far as ancient civilizations. There's evidence of cooperative-like structures in the Babylonian Empire, in ancient China, in ancient Greece, things like credit institutions that function sort of like modern-day cooperatives. In ancient Babylonia, or in ancient Babylon, pardon, there was evidence of agriculture co-ops and sharing of resources in those contexts. And also in indigenous communities, past and present, the principles and values of indigenous communities are often very aligned with those of the cooperative principles of reciprocity, solidarity, community help. And so really wanting to acknowledge that this cooperation has been rooted in many different social settings over millennia, really. And then we see also in the Middle Ages some trade unions forming to create better working conditions, access better pay. And then we can skip ahead 800 years, and then we land in the Industrial Revolution, England, and this is where the sort of modern cooperative was formalized by the Rochdale Society. And the Rochdale Society formed largely because of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution on workers and not being able to access great wages, being exploited, working many long hours, and also having challenges with access to quality food and goods. And so the society formed to be able to get people who didn't have a lot of income, quality food, and as well as education. And then what's interesting about this point in time is because of the Industrial Revolution being the first moment of this sort of like capitalist expansion and exploitation of people in the sort of way we kind of see it today as well, co-ops really started to take off across Europe in this more formalized way, and also into Japan and China and other parts of Asia, and eventually landing itself in Canada and spreading across Canada, primarily through the formation of settler-owned agriculture co-ops, which is relevant to our discussion today, and as well as credit unions like Desjardins being founded in 1900. And they spread across Canada, and then landing in BC in the early 1900s and through till now, starting primarily also through these agriculture co-ops as well as fishing cooperatives formed by Japanese immigrants in the province. And then this brings us now to today. I know that was very fast history. There's so much cooperative history, and I highly recommend doing some more research if it's of interest. But now let's talk about what BC co-ops look like today. And also in this discussion, we get to talk about the different possible manifestations of this model and the ways in which you can structure it so that it best serves what the membership needs are. So this is not a exhaustive list of some cooperatives in British Columbia. You may see some co-ops you know of. You may see some co-ops you yourself are a member of. You may see some co-ops that are surprising to you to know that they are in fact cooperatives. I know I personally was very surprised to see PharmaSave and Home Hardware on this list, but they are in fact cooperatives. And so let's just break this down a little bit. Just stealing some co-ops away. These co-ops that are left on the screen here are ones that are owned by individuals. So if we take a look at, for example, Vancity and Community Savings, they are credit unions. And so they are owned by the individuals who are accessing the banking services, by the customers or the clients of the credit union. Similarly, we see Moto down there, for example, and that company is a car share program for those of you who don't know, and it is owned by the people who actually book out the vehicles to drive them, by the individuals themselves. If we swap it out, then we have the co-ops that are owned by organizations. So rather than, for example, a good one here to look at is Home Hardware. It's not actually the people who shop at Home Hardware who are the owners of the business. It is all the stores themselves. The individual Home Hardwares are a part of a cooperative together. So that's sort of a distinction there. It's important to make. Then we have the for-profit or the for-surplus cooperatives, the co-ops that are looking to make some surplus as a way to support their cooperative and membership. And then there's also, as I said, there's nonprofit cooperatives. So when the profit isn't really essential to supporting the community of members or isn't essential to providing the service or good that the co-op is aiming to provide, then perhaps it will be a nonprofit cooperative. And then now we have some different structures. So these are all on the left side. They are the consumer cooperatives. And so the consumers are actually the member owners of the organizations. If we go back to Vancity and Community Savings, it's the people using the banking services who are the member owners. Or with Moto, it's the people using the car share service who are the member owners of those cooperatives. In the middle, we have producer co-ops, and producer co-ops are individual organizations or businesses who come together to access some sort of common need. For example, Terminal City Glass at the very top is a glass blowing artist cooperative in Vancouver. And in this case, it's individual artists who have all pooled their resources to get studio space and access to a furnace to be able to do glass blowing, because it's not really practical for individual glass blowing artists to each have their own furnaces for their work. It's also wouldn't be necessarily the most safe type of studio to have in your backyard or in your garage. In the case of, we can look at another example, Yeast Van, down near the bottom left. They are a collection of breweries in Vancouver that have all come together to share some resources and do collective marketing and strategy. And then on the far right side here, we have the worker cooperative, and these co-ops are owned by the actual workers of the organizations, the employees who make the operations happen. So if you're from Vancouver, you may have seen Shift Delivery driving around or biking around town rather, and they are a cooperative that does carbon zero delivery in downtown Vancouver through using electronic trikes that have trailers in the back that can carry up to 1 ton of goods. And so the people who are actually pedaling around the city delivering the food or whatever it is that they're delivering are the owners. It's not the people purchasing the delivery service. It's the people actually on the bikes biking around. And then there's a couple other ways this structure, or the co-op model can manifest. There's what is called investment co-ops. You may recognize Glen Valley Organic Farms, which is a cooperative that works to secure land for agriculture in the Fraser Valley. And beside that, we have actually, I can't remember if it's West or East Kootenay Investment Cooperative. And they pool resources to be able to invest in supporting local initiatives, which are really great. And if you are looking to start or get funding for your co-op, these are great places to look into. There's also second tier cooperatives, which are co-ops that are where their members are also organizations, or in the case of, for example, BCCA, our members are other cooperative businesses. So we're a second tier co-op. Dawson Co-op, who's on the call, is a part of a second tier cooperative. This Federated Co-op Limited sign, the logo I think many of us are familiar with for co-op gas stations. They are all a part of, all the individual gas stations are a part of one co-op together under this shared brand. On the right-hand side of co-op, we have Arctic Cooperatives Limited, ACL, which is a second tier co-op of consumer co-ops that are all serving northern regions of Canada, so primarily the territories and northern parts of the provinces. We also have third tier co-ops. I don't totally understand how this works, but the logo we have here is the cooperators, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is technically owned by the co-op movement. I would recommend looking on their website to understand that. I need to do my own research because I don't fully get it, but it's pretty interesting. And then we have the multi-stakeholder cooperatives. And so these are cooperatives where you have multiple types of member owners. In the case of Brave, this is a technology cooperative that works to prevent overdose deaths. And so they have members who are workers, consumers of the service, and also folks like social workers or people who have a clear understanding of the needs of the clients that they serve. Also on the far right-hand side, we have Stocksy, which is a platform for getting stock images that's owned by the people, like the photographers or artists, the people who provide the stock images, and also owned by the employees who run the business. This is kind of a fun slide because I find it super fascinating. But this is just to sort of zoom out a bit from where we just were in BC and look at the world, or look across North America and see some really big deal cooperatives that sort of fly under the radar, like the Green Bay Packers or Barcelona FC. Also, here's Tillamook, my favorite cheese. Best Western. These sort of bigger names that don't necessarily promote that they're a cooperative, but they are in fact owned by individuals or organizations. The Green Bay Packers and Barcelona FC are owned by their fans, which is pretty powerful, pretty cool. And finally, just to zoom out even further and talk about the global cooperative movement and really how this is a interconnected network around the world, and highlight too that there are over 1 billion people who are involved in or are members of at least one co-op, and there are over 3 million co-ops around the world. So this is a really broad movement. And if we just look at this diagram here, we see your co-op, or an individual co-op is in the middle, but supported then by the BC Co-op Association, by the second tier cooperative. And we ourselves are members of Co-ops and Mutuals Canada, which is the national association for cooperatives. And then Co-ops and Mutuals Canada is also part of this international network, the International Cooperative Alliance. So really just realizing that this movement is international and global, and there's so much amazing work going on. Oh, great. And that brings us to the end of the Co-ops 101. I will pass it over to Michelle to then take it away with some case studies about ag and food co-ops.
Thanks, Madeline. Really appreciate that Co-ops 101. It's so informative, and it's getting more and more nuanced each time I hear it, and something new pops out every time. So thanks for bringing that together. I did want to highlight a few agriculture and food co-ops in BC based on who was signing up for this conversation session. And I'll start off with talking about the Island Vegetable Cooperative Association. If you could move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a nonprofit marketing co-op, and some of the language around this type of co-op is producer or marketing co-op. This one was formed in 1952. It's based in Saanich on the island. However, 5 of their grower members are on the island and 5 grower members are in the Lower Mainland. I spoke with their general manager almost a year ago, and he provided a bit of background information about the cooperative association. So in their heyday, they had 190 grower members. And so you can see that their number of grower members has decreased quite a bit. He was describing that this is partly because smaller farms are less viable or no longer viable. And it also stems from successioning the farms. If there was no one to succession the farm to, it wasn't carrying on. So there are 10 grower members currently, and they employ 490 people. The general manager spoke about the co-op model and how it's serving them. And he mentioned that they appreciate how flexible the co-op model is, and the return on investments is huge. And in Madeline's presentation, she described these as the patronage returns, and these go directly back to the growers, and that's seen as a huge benefit. The other piece about having this cooperative association for marketing is that they have a general manager, and so he is networking with various markets and making the connections, helping to aggregate what each of the grower members is sending and managing the distribution of it. So it helps to streamline that and allows the growers to focus on growing. So interestingly, I think part of how they are staying competitive in the market is the growers are growing several items for 10 months of the year, and they're working to expand that so that they have some items available year round. The other benefit of this cooperative association was that the general manager and other folks in the organization can help the purchasers understand how items are getting from the ground to wholesale and providing some education. There have been some challenges with, and I think this is like not just with IBCA, but challenges with purchasers holding to their agreements with the growers. And so growers make a plan, they buy all the seeds and plant and do all that, and then partway through the season the agreement is not honored, and so they're left with a lot of product to move. So having this association helps to work with the purchasers to be like, we really need to know these plans well in advance, because growing, you're dealing with natural cycles. They can't be changed rapidly. I think I'll move on to Glen Valley Organic Farm, which has been mentioned a couple of times in Madeline's presentation. They describe themselves as a community service co-op, and they formed to purchase land. So they hold 50 acres in Abbotsford. They had 50 shareholders come together to purchase this land, and they currently have 2 farming businesses operating there, Close to Home Organics and Earth Apple Organic Farm. So their shareholders, Elvie can maybe fill this in later, but their shareholders or members, I'm not sure how it's defined for them, come from a range of backgrounds. So some of their shareholders come from a farming background, education, law, project management, marketing, group facilitation, and they also have an on-farm apiarist who supports the pollination of what's growing there. So they have used investment to support their co-op and to be able to hold the land. And
I can jump in there quickly, Michelle, and just put a little detail on that. This is and Maddie did a great job of illustrating all the various possibilities of how co-ops can organize themselves. And this one, the members are those that invested money in order to secure the land and to keep it in agricultural production in perpetuity. And so the co-op has a agreements for the use of that land with those that farm it. So it's a broad community that is seeking to secure the land, and then the co-op decides who gets to farm on that land, and there is, of course, payment involved for access.
Great, thanks, Alvi. Yeah, the two key pieces from the website highlight that the aims of this co-op and the land use is that it is sustainable, like stewarding the land, and that it is for local food and supporting local food security. So I imagine those are key pieces in their decision making. Great, thanks, Alvi. I'll move on to Glorious Organics. And this is a worker co-op involved in agriculture. They're in Aldergrove. So the Glorious Organics actually started in 1986 and then formalized as a co-op in 2006. So it's got a long history. They started off with 5 members and they're currently now at 3 members. I was hoping Heather would be on the call. She could provide share some of their story being one of the founding members. So their membership has gone down. It's sitting at 3, which they're able to function at that level. Heather mentioned that the optimum is 5, to have at least 5. And so I was hoping she could share a bit about how that succession has happened, because many of the founding members are no longer worker co-op members. And so they've had new worker co-op members come in. And then they're also recruiting, like they're open to have more members joining. So that may be something that I can send out as an addendum, like a bit of that story of how they're doing that. And so the picture here has many of the founding members present, some of the newer members, and some of the folks who are still currently working with Glorious Organics. There's another slide connected with Glorious Organics, which was more for if Heather was here to share about their land stewardship, because it's quite a fascinating story over the almost 40 years that they've been operating. I think I'll leave it there and we can transition to the Q&A session. So in terms of the Q&A session, this was to open it up for folks to be able to ask questions directly to a co-op developer. There were also quite a few questions that came in during the registration, which we appreciate. And there are some sort of common threads from those. So I think to begin, we can open it up to questions from the floor, and then I can weave in what came in through the registration. So you can either unmute and voice your question or type it in the chat. You can raise a hand if you want to. Looks like Todd. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Todd. I'm entirely new to co-ops. This is my first learning lesson here. Come from a corporate background. So I mean, when I see names like Home Hardware and PharmaSave, which I would think of things like Shoppers Drug Mart that has more of a corporate structure. How does management make corporate planning decisions in the context of a co-op when you have all those voting members there, and how do they keep control or manage the direction of the company if the voters sort of vote something different? And how does management implement their strategies in the context of a co-op like that when you have such a large organization? I'm surprised to see a PharmaSave and a Home Hardware there versus a Shoppers Drug Mart and Home Depot and those types of competitive companies.
I can answer that. I would say these are also competitive. This is certainly a different kind of structure. If I'm old enough to remember the local mom and pop hardware stores and the local pharmacies. I mean, that's who Home Hardware and PharmaSave represent. So they formed the co-op in order to be able to compete with the big box stores that were entering the market. And not a franchise. They don't pay the cream of their profits in order to be able to carry somebody else's logo. The co-op works for them. It provides common branding, common distribution, et cetera, et cetera. The board of directors is drawn specifically from that membership. And I mean, how it operates in the co-op will vary from co-op to co-op, but generally the board is responsible for setting the strategic direction for the organization and hire management in order to be able to carry out that. And management is responsible for the day-to-day. So the membership defines the vision, defines the strategic direction, management executes.
All right. So who's actually coming up with that vision? Is it proposed by boards of director members, or is it proposed by individual members that it reaches the board of director level? And is there some sort of process where maybe they shortlist if they had 100 ideas and proposals from members, that the board of directors shortlist to maybe 5, and then that goes to a management vote? Or
it's an excellent question, Todd. I've never sat in on one of their sessions, and I don't know how precisely they do it.
Okay, all right. I mean, the only other co-op I'm really familiar with was Mac, who had a lot of management issues there, and obviously ended up getting bought out. And so when I looked at Mac, my perspective or perception of Mac is not one of members, but it was really sort of led by sort of a CEO and board kind of organization, even though it was a cooperative, and then it ran into some issues there. Unhappy members, and then they got bought out. A lot of members are unhappy and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, we could probably spend the rest of the time talking about what happened with Mac. But I think some salient, and I wouldn't say it was any one thing. I think it was a cluster of problems. But some key things to point out there: MEC was a consumer co-op as opposed to producer or worker co-op. It was the people purchasing there, as opposed to PharmaSave and Home Hardware, where it was the store owners. So in PharmaSave and Home Hardware, they have a very vested interest in order to be able to ensure that the organization represents their needs and supports them economically, right? At MEC, I think that kind of connection between the consumer and the co-op over time kind of atrophied. And the membership share never increased from the $5 when it was introduced in the 1970s. And became this tiny little speed bump between you and your purchase. The membership didn't totally understand their relationship to their co-op. Management grew, the organization grew dramatically. I would say a big problem with MEC is that it started playing a corporate game. It started, lots of flashy stores, lots of products that was not kind of critical to the kinds of things that they traditionally provided. And they tried to keep up with their corporate competitors rather than serving the specific needs of their members. The board, you had to hold a BA in order to be a board director. In our business schools, they don't teach the co-op model, so that's not a particularly useful thing for a large cooperative. And probably its governance outgrew its size. The organization outgrew its governance, and on and on and on and on. And so it went off the rails. These things happen to co-ops from time to time, where that membership connection between the service being delivered and where the members are actively involved in determining the fate of their organization, that's less likely to happen. Other things being equal in terms of the competitive pressures in the marketplace.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm just exploring all this and asking questions is because so beyond my current background, investor relations, investment banking, corporate strategy, management consulting, and all that to corporations and new ventures and stuff, I just had this idea of, I love pizza, would love to have a pizza chain of my own one day. Is it the franchise model? Is it the co-op model? I wanted to explore this. Because I have those community, aspirations, and whether I could have a co-op model within a pizza chain, and but what I still, I don't have a good concept or understanding of is that differentiation between the management of the business and the membership, and how you keep the vision of the company going in the right direction. And how can there be some conflict between management and members sometimes, and how do you manage through all of that and that sort of thing? So
Sure. Well,
I'm
I'll
just
respond.
exploring all of this.
Yeah, I'll respond to that, and then we should get to the those that have their hands up. But I mean, I don't know of a cooperative pizza brand, although I'd love that.
Yeah, that's why I'm
I
thinking of
consume
it.
The critical thing there is that that's not something that you create. That's something that a group of people create.
Yeah.
You can't create a cooperative structure and then find members for it. The nascent membership will decide what their co-op will look like.
Yeah.
And we see this from time to time, that this idea that, well, I'll create a co-op here and then I'll be the general manager or something like that. Well, you can try and do that, and the membership will say, maybe one day they'll say, well, thanks very much for your service, but you're not required anymore, and let you go. This is really determined by the membership. Those members could be convened, they can be encouraged, but ultimately they have to determine how the cooperative is structured and governed.
Right. Okay. No, that's good. I mean, there's just so many issues between franchisees and franchisors, and I was looking at, is there a better model out there, which has led me to look at the co-op model to see if there's something better there that makes it a little more where the franchisees feel like, the owners of the stores feel that they, the members, they feel that they have a little more say in what management's doing. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that, Todd. And Alvy. So I see Bernie's hand up, then Andy, and there are some questions in the chat from Josh. So Bernie, you're up.
First, before I go to the question that I had in mind, I'm going to respond to Todd something. A very good friend of mine has been for maybe 2 decades the executive director of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. And their mandate is to help forming co-ops, worker co-ops, to understand governance models, to go through the legal contracting and that sort of thing. So and I know that she's done things with bakeries and so on. So maybe the pizza thing is something that would, I think there's such a scale difference between these different forms of co-ops that the scale and the contracts suited to smaller businesses might be something that would be interesting to you. I don't know. So
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can find them online. My question is this. So I actually have I've got 20 years of experience living in a home ownership cooperative, so a co-housing community, but the structure is a home ownership cooperative. And kind of based on the success of that, my wife and I bought, with my numbered company, we bought a hunk of land on Quadra, and we are determined that it be a co-op. And essentially, we're going to gift the land to the co-op, and it's ALR and so on. So we've got 25 hectares of land. So my main question is the legality or legal help or something with getting it from private corporation status to cooperative ownership. So there's a transition needed, and if there's been experience with these in Abbotsford or whatever, I'm looking for advice or people that have done this before and run into roadblocks and that sort of thing. Okay.
Yes. First of all, I can't let go the thing about the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation and the pizza idea again. I don't think what Todd's talking about there is a workers co-op. It's possibly a producers co-op, and so it might not be the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. But I throw that out there. But in terms of, in answer to your question, Bernie, that we've been getting lots of inquiries about intentional communities. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, or are you talking strictly about agriculture and transferring the business from a private ownership or corporate ownership into a co-op?
both.
Right.
I mean, what we have envisioned is a permaculture farm, which tends to be intensive. There's a lot of hands involved in growing stuff, right? So we bought enough land to be several households cooperatively owning and managing the farm, and therefore living off the proceeds.
Yeah, cooperative ownership in this that involves living on a property is a bit of a complicated area, and it's not something we've done a lot of because we focus in on enterprise development as opposed to housing. Unfortunately, it's not something that the Cooperative Housing Federation does either. So we are exploring this area, and we have a meeting coming up mid-December to look at what common needs are, because we are getting lots of inquiries in this way. And we might be able to get you invited to that in order to participate in that conversation. So this is something that we're actively exploring in terms of learning what we can do to support. In terms of transitioning an organization into a co-op, there is a brand new consulting group, which is a worker co-op itself, which is looking to do exactly that. And they can work with organizations to help them transition into a cooperative ownership.
What's the name of that?
It's called Coactive. I don't think the ink is dry on their incorporation documents, so they're just getting out of the gate now. But
Okay.
I put my colleague Zoe's email in the chat for you, and she can connect you, or she can certainly help you define what the best path forward is.
Thank you.
Yeah, so related to this, Elvie, your comment around some meetings coming up, Foodlands Cooperative of BC, I believe, has been having conversations with the Ministry of Agriculture around housing and land. So there may be some intersection there. Foodlands Cooperative also has some experience with supporting agricultural and getting out of the real estate market. So may have some ties with your context, Bernie. So
It's exactly our philosophy. So we just want to see how to make it work, right?
mhm,
Yeah.
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 So I could make that connection as well. Great, thank you. So Andy, you were up next.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for this. I'm just curious. So I manage a farm that's associated with Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and interested in hearing if there are agricultural producer co-ops that also find ways for the consumers to invest in that co-op as well. It seems like they're a blending of that consumer and producer model, where the CSA model is one way that consumers have been invested in farms, but if there's ways that it happens within a cooperative setting, I'd be curious to learn about that.
Right. No, that's a great question, Andy, and something that strikes and hits a nerve with me, because I get a little nervous about these kinds of things, to be honest. What you're describing is potentially what's referred to in some circles as a multi-stakeholder, and Maddie touched on this in her presentation, or multi-category member co-op, where you have more than one category of member involved. These are formed from time to time, and Maddie gave a couple of examples of that, and in some cases it works really well, but there are significant challenges with this kind of model, in that all the various members in whatever category you are exploring need to be involved in the process of that. And because the producers could set up a co-op that has more than one category of members, but if the consuming members have not been involved, it generally doesn't work out very well. There's no buy-in, there's no kind of real kind of vested interest or sense of ownership in that. And you may run into potential problems in terms of governance. If you do have all of those participants involved in the development of the co-op, you may still have, be careful what you wish for. You may have competing interests at the board table, right? Producers certainly in general want to get paid more. Consumers want a better price for the thing that they're paying for. And this creates some tension. Now, this is not to dissuade you from exploring that, but just to say it is possible and it can be explored. But really, I think this is in the co-op development process is about identifying who is in the room, whose interests need to be served, and what greater community benefit is there from the creation of this co-op. It does not necessarily mean that those consumers are not going to be served by the creation of this co-op, but what needs to be determined is, do they need to be members in order to achieve that? But these are good questions to be asking, and you know, we connect groups with co-op developers. We have a pool of such consultants, and they would support you in walking through that process.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I see you, Stephen, and there's just a couple of things in the chat, and we'll circle back to you. So Josh had a couple of questions. Any tips for larger co-ops on how to stay rooted to their grassroots values? How do you avoid outgrowing your governance? Feel free to unmute, Josh, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would just say at this point too, that obviously this conversation is predominantly for the ag food side, so I'm happy to take less precedence in the conversation to if there's other ag food conversations, but that question came up as a result of this stuff, the conversation about MEC, of course, but anyway, if there's other ag food conversations, I would love to give more room to that as well.
I think I'll touch on it quickly, Josh. I mean, I think it's an excellent question. I think you know, in my work supporting co-op development, like when is the co-op developed? When is the co-op complete? Never, right? It's like you know, it's like a spiritual practice or Tai Chi or something like that. You get better and better and better at it, but you never actually get to the place that you want to go. You don't create the co-op and then the co-op magically sort of magically supports itself. I think it's a constant kind of engagement with the membership, right? There's the governance for sure, and ensuring that people are participating in the democracy of the co-op, but also do members have an opportunity to express their needs outside of the governance structure? Are members actively engaged? Are members onboarded correctly? You know, is educational material getting out to the membership on a regular kind of basis? That looks different from co-op to co-op, but there are resources out there that help co-ops do exactly that. My own take is that it's executing Principle 5 on a regular basis. Education, training, and information, that people are that somebody's hand is on that tiller constantly, and that the culture of the co-op is constantly reinvigorated. People need to understand that this is a different kind of model, and it hinges on their participating in it, their being owners of this entity, and then ultimately stepping up as leaders when it's necessary. But we can put you in touch with those kinds of resources.
Yeah, it's a common conversation for us on a regular basis. Our co-op is around the $120 million range in multiple business lines, and so it's we're at that size where you're kind of expanding past what the grassroots people generally are day-to-day interacting with the board, but we're still small enough that you really want that still, right? But
yeah, no, I think we can help you with that.
Sure, that'd be great to have a conversation. Thanks.
We've lost Michelle, but she'll hopefully come back. Stephen, you didn't have a chance to speak yet, did you?
Yeah, I just want to chime in on this particular question as well.
Mm-hmm.
I ran a raspberry co-op, pretty large, 125 growers. It in the end didn't work out. It was 50 some odd years old. It petered out. And I think the reason why is because we didn't do exactly what Al was talking about. We didn't engage our member base in a informed, respectful system. We did not, especially young people getting involved in co-ops. You know, they want to take some leadership roles. They want to be engaged. They want to hear that their voices are heard. And it's really important, especially for the older, more mature co-op member who may have been sat on the board for a long period of time, to figure out a way that you can reach out and pass the baton and make sure that they're up to snuff to be able to run that co-op from a policy perspective. I also think it's important for management inside co-ops to have the tools they need to successfully implement the strategy of the co-op and follow its rules of engagement, and to always be looking ahead on how we can innovate and develop and grow and be successful. I think when those things fall flat, when you lose confidence of your management team, or you don't engage your newer growers, or you get stuck in the old way of doing it, I think it really has a problem as a co-op, and so you need to be really understanding of this democratic process that they all talk about.
Totally agree. Especially in terms of the Stephen, what you mentioned in terms of turnover. Co-ops are ideally suited to support turnover of membership and boards. That's what, I mean, the entity is designed for that. You put your capital in, when you leave, you take your capital out and somebody else can take your place. But if you don't support this kind of member onboarding, the founding generation moves on and others come on board, you may have a group of people that really fundamentally don't understand the difference about the model that they've inherited. And we have seen this happen from time to time, and it's kind of distressing. And sometimes they don't even know to come to us or to come to other cooperatives in order to seek support. And then the positive side of it is that when they do outreach and they do start to engage their membership again, how quickly that can be reversed. People, I think, have an inherent understanding of this model, but they do need to be supported in that, because we all get bogged down in the everyday and we all get bogged down in the business of the co-op.
Great. Do we have any final? Oh wait, I feel like maybe we missed one in the chat. Jordan, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, just turning to the agriculture side for a second. I work at Gordon Neighborhood House and as a food justice analyst, and I'm sort of new to the idea of co-ops, but looking to learn more about their role in maintaining our food system. And my question is, how can agriculture co-ops help address inequities in our food systems, such as affordability, labor practices, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I wish co-ops were completely immune from the vicissitudes of the market. They're not. But I think, and so co-ops will face all kinds of costs and revenue pressures, just like any other enterprise. I think what's critical, though, in this space is that co-ops are not profit maximizers. In that we're not trying to create value for external shareholders. We're trying to support the membership. So if it's a workers' cooperative or a producers' co-op, or however they're operating in this, we can remove a big chunk of the profit motivation and to ensure that more resources go back into the hands of the membership that's participating. So depending on how the co-op is structured, that might mean better pay for those working. For the producers that are participating, it might mean a better return on their produce, let's say. All other things being equal. But I think that is the critical difference about this model, that it's a market competitive model, but it is not about maximizing value for external shareholders. And that's where the advantage lies.
Thank you.
I thought I would just jump in as well, because one of the things that really is drawing our Dawson Co-op, I think, in my opinion, to this conversation is in the area of community resilience. And so coming from a northern climate, the sustainable source of local food in a colder climate is very difficult. And so that's a big part of the reason why we're interested in this conversation, what that looks like, and just different innovative ideas that that would help mitigate some of those struggles in terms of access to local food, and access to real fresh food. Really, it's not just local, but just the fact that it would be fresh locally would be great. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to exploring more of that.
Great.
Great. Any final thoughts before we move into sort of wrapping up for the afternoon?
I'm responding to Josh. Josh, a good friend of mine, he's an engineer, but he started a very significant permaculture operation in the foothills in Alberta, and he's done this marvelous thing with a very energy efficient northern greenhouse. So check out Verge Permaculture online, and it's pretty damned impressive. And he's at a high elevation in the foothills, so it won't be as bitter or cold as some of your things, but it looks really promising. So, okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Maddie, if you're going to move on, I regret that I'm pinch hitting for my colleague Zoe Crichton, who's suffering a power outage, but I do have another meeting I have to get to and have to physically leave the building. So my apologies for cutting out, but a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to following up on these opportunities that you've presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Elvie.
Take care.
Great. So yeah, just to I've been left. Just to wrap up with you all, thank you all so much for being here. Please always, I will drop in the chat. My email is education@bcca.coop, and Michelle's is innovation@bcca.coop. I'm sure she'll be following up with she'll follow up with the recording and also potentially some additional links for resources and things like that. If this was helpful, if there's something like this, like a sort of convening people together to talk about agriculture and co-ops is something that feels useful for sort of maintaining the network and learning potentially from each other as well, please do let us know, because we would love to. Our job is really to support everyone who wants to be involved in co-ops and do what we can to support the movement. So please do voice that to us. And if you want to pop in the chat, just something that stood out from the session today or something you're going to take away, you're invited to do that. And then yeah, please be in touch, and we'll be in touch with you as well and moving forward.
Thanks, Maddie.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Maddie.
Ah, we have a Michelle. Welcome back, Michelle. Everyone's just popping their takeaway ideas in the chat, and we're wrapping up. Oh, and I guess I should ask you, Michelle, if there's any. I just said you would send out the recording, potentially with some other links that could be useful. Is there any other sort of resource sharing follow-up that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this came up while I was bumped out of the room. There is a December meeting, a conversation happening around land. And I think that was mostly applicable to Bernie, maybe, but I'll include that in the email. And Zoe will be leading that, so I'll include her contact information.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yes.
Yeah, look forward to the next conversation session.
Okay, stop recording.
Oh yeah, thank you.